Hello, and welcome to this quick introduction to some of the theories of learning and teaching we most rely on in this module. Most of these will be familiar to most of you from learning and teaching in higher education, and we'll be looking at them in more detail in the Key Theories session on 7th October. So this video will just skim quickly through to familiarise you with some of the big ideas. We'll be looking at Stephen Brookfield's 4 lenses to being a reflective teacher, Chickering and Gampson's 7 principles for undergraduate education, Ginny Salmon's 5 stages of online learning and teaching, Biggs and Tang's constructive alignment, Nicholl and McFarlane-Dick's 7 principles of good feedback practice, and finally Bloom's taxonomy. Some familiar names up there already, I hope. I'm not going to talk about Brookfield's reflective lenses other than to list them as the lens of student eyes, the lens of colleagues' perceptions, the lens of personal experience, and the lens of theoretical literature. Instead, I recommend you watch Mary's separate video on reflective practice. They're important though, and underpin a lot of what we'll be doing and what we'll be looking for in your assignments. Chickering and Gampson's 7 principles for undergraduate education came out of an extensive review of the existing research into what actually works in teaching undergrads. You'd think they might have dated by now. They did the work in 1987. But this is still a great list and works just as well for postgrads and online as well as face-to-face. If you take away just one thing to think about in your future teaching, you could do worse than to stick this one on the wall above your desk. 1. Encourage student-tutor contact. 2. Encourage student-student cooperation. 3. Encourage active learning. 4. Give prompt feedback. 5. Emphasize time on task. 6. Have and communicate high expectations. And 7. Respect diverse talents and ways of learning. Next up, we have Salmon's 5 stages of online learning and teaching. Last year, I wouldn't have included this among the key theories of learning and teaching, though it's absolutely fundamental to online learning. But this year, we're doing so much blended learning, and even the face-to-face we're doing is always at risk of being moved online. So it's useful to remind ourselves of these stages and of the fact that as online teachers, it's up to us to help scaffold our students through things like access and motivation on the bottom step, up through online socialization on the second, on through information exchange, and up towards knowledge construction and development up at the top. What this mostly means for us as teachers is a reminder that in a face-to-face classroom, we don't need to do things like say, these are the tables, these are the chairs, this is the screen on which I'll display things, and this is what I expect you should do when I put you in small groups for an activity. We know our students know all of that already. Online, they mostly won't know the equivalent things. Some of them will be able to work that stuff out, but some won't, and they'll all benefit from it being as explicit as possible. Biggs and Tang's theory of constructive alignment has been very influential at the course design stage. The idea that what you teach should be closely linked to what you assess, which should be closely linked to your intended learning outcomes. This is another area where part of the usefulness of the theory is a reminder to be explicit. If you're assessing something, you should be explicitly teaching it. Not necessarily on your individual module, but you should make sure that it's being taught somewhere on the programme. Essay writing is a common example here. Most humanities and social science disciplines assess it, but we don't necessarily teach it so much as assume our students will pick it up along the way. And talking of assessment, here are Nicholl and McFarlane-Dick's 7 principles of good feedback practice. Again, this is a meta-analysis which sifted through a large amount of existing research and distilled it into some common threads. So, good feedback practice helps clarify what good performance is, that is, goals, criteria, and expected standards. It facilitates the development of self-assessment or reflection in learning. It delivers high-quality information to students about their learning. Encourages teacher and peer dialogue around learning. Encourages positive motivational beliefs and self-esteem. And think back to Chickering and Gampson's communicate high expectations here. It provides opportunities to close the gap between current and desired performance, and it provides information to teachers that can be used to help shape teaching. Note that last one, which includes what is effectively feedback to teachers alongside feedback to their students. It's easy to think of those as 2 separate kinds of feedback, but they're actually 2 sides of the same thing. Now, thinking of the kind of things we might ask students to do, here's Bloom's taxonomy, or rather the version of it that David Crathwell updated in 2002. There are various different versions of the taxonomy, but this is my favourite, in part because I like the direct verbs. The idea here is that in order to get to the higher levels of learning, students need to move through the lower levels first. That is, you can't meaningfully evaluate or create unless you first remembered and understood. You'll also find associated with the taxonomy some very useful lists of other verbs operating at the same levels, which you can use in writing learning outcomes. Though I do want to give a warning against using understand. It's best avoided in learning outcomes because you can't directly measure it. It's just something that happens inside someone's head. If that's the sort of thing you're after in your learning outcome, you could try more measurable words like describe or demonstrate instead. And here's where you can read the full papers or books. They're all pretty accessible and well written and all available online, either as journal articles or through the Brookes Library.